We'll just give.
Oh,
Hi, good evening.
hi.
Thank you for joining us tonight, this afternoon.
I know. Well, I'm glad that we could make it work. I definitely have like time zone dyslexia, so I'm glad we got it
That
figured
was
out.
my bad. So I'll just give a little intro to anyone that doesn't know you yet. So Dr. Naine is an expert in complex trauma, attachment, trauma bonds, and narcissism. Narcissism, inspired by her former marriage to the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, made infamous by the book and the movie of the same name. Her new book, Run Like Hell. Dr. Naine, this is your cue to hold
Oh,
it
yes.
up.
Oh, my book. Yep, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. A new book, Run Like Hell, is a therapist's guide to recognizing, escaping, and healing from trauma bonds. So thank you so much for being here. Was the book title a no-brainer for you? Did it come immediately?
It didn't come immediately. And it didn't come from me. It actually came from my publisher. And when they first presented it to me, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's academic enough. But then I let it sit with me, and it's, of course, absolutely perfect.
I think so. I think so, because you are an academic in this area now, aren't you? It's like lived
Yes.
experience and lots of research and lots of hard work.
Exactly, exactly. So my academic hat was a little like, oh no, but then it's perfect title because when you are in a toxic dysfunctional relationship, when you're talking to a friend about it and you tell them, what do they always say? Run, you should run. So they came up with a great title. I'm very grateful to them.
Yeah, brilliant. So just so we can get to know a little bit about you currently before we go into what trauma bonds are and kind of how we might recognize them, heal from them, move on from them. Where are you and how are you today? And what does a typical day in your life look like currently?
Yeah, so right now I am in sunny Boca Raton, Florida. And I moved here about 3 years ago after the pandemic because I was living in California for 24 years. And so a typical day of mine, well, my children are all grown up, so that makes my life a lot easier now. I have a lot more time to myself. But a typical day of mine is usually I wake up bright and early, usually around 6 a.m. Deal with my two little doggies. Well, they're not little. I have a Bernedoodle and a Havapoo. Take them for their walk and have my coffee. And then I never really know what my day is going to be like. I sit a lot as a therapist, so I have to get some form of movement in because it's just sitting is not good for me. So I try to do that too in the morning, but sometimes it's in the afternoon. And then my day is filled with patients, podcasts, book talks. Last week I was in New York doing some book signings. So it's an eclectic mix of things that I'm doing to promote mental health and healthy relationships for people everywhere.
Mm. And has this book been a long time coming? Like, is it something that you, like, as you just said to me before we went live, is you're 20 something years into this, like, this
Right.
experience? So so when the Wolf of Wall Street book came out, which you didn't have anything to do with, but you were obviously portrayed very heavily, it was your life story for that part of your life,
Correct.
wasn't it? So
Right.
did you immediately want to write the kind of retort to it, or?
You know what? No, I did not want to write the retort to it at all because if I would have done that, it would have still been about Jordan, right? It would have still been in response to him. And I think at that point in my life, I was around 44 when the movie came out, maybe 39 when he wrote the book. I was just going back to school myself to become a therapist at 39. So anybody who's older and wondering about like a second career path, I highly recommend exploring that. And I think though the book was being written my whole life, because I grew up, I was telling you that, I was actually born in England. And I'm sure I lost the accent a long time ago because I left as an infant. And I was raised by a single mother in Brooklyn who was very into feelings and reading Jung and Freud. And so I grew up in the 70s with a very psychologically oriented mother who planted the seeds of psychology into me back then. Then I modeled, then I had a crazy life with my ex-husband, The Wolf of Wall Street. He wrote a book, the movie came out. And as I said, I was going back to school simultaneously. So the book really is a culmination of my life.
Mm. Yeah.
really. Of course, inspired by my mother, her teachings, my schoolwork, my marriage, and then of course my work with my patients.
Yeah, sure. And I can't wait to get into that, because when you talk about your work with your patients, it seems like that really evolved as well. That kind of, you didn't
Yes,
necessarily know where that was going to go, but you were just seeing lots of people coming to you who were, there was lots of patterns, and that's why you decided to specialize
correct.
in the trauma bonds. But what do you, I just think your story is so incredible, because you are a walking, talking, living, glowing example of not only can you get out of a situation like this, but you can live a good life, like a great life.
Yeah.
Like, you have a great life, don't you now? You like your life.
Yeah, I do. I'm happily married
Yeah.
for 24 years. My daughter, my daughter and son from Jordan. My daughter's a therapist and my son's a musician, and I have 3 stepchildren. And yeah, life is good. I mean, listen, life always has its bumps for sure. That's, but no, I do. I'm enjoying my life very much and I love my work.
That's important, isn't it? I think to highlight that for people who might be stuck in a situation, or feel stuck in a situation, or trapped, and think there's like, it feels so kind of far away, a different
Yeah.
life. So I think it's
It feels
important.
it, yeah, when you're in that moment and you're, traumatized either from relationship or from life or just dealing with mental health challenges in general, it can be very hard to picture a life where you feel happy and content and fulfilled, but it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you describe your relationship with yourself today, currently?
I think I like myself. I think that I respect myself, and the way I work with myself is the way I work with my patients. I'm no better than anybody. I'm no worse than anybody. I'm just me. And I think that's a really nice way to look at ourselves. And the most important thing for me today as a 56-year-old woman is being authentic. Not saying no when I mean yes, not people pleasing, not being able to set boundaries, but really being authentic and taking risks and expressing that authenticity. And then I just discovered that the more I did that, the more confident I became, and then that just fed each other. So today, in this moment, I like myself. Ask me tomorrow, but
Yeah.
today, right now, it's a good one. But I've worked hard for it. Been in therapy, before I was a therapist for 25 years.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. It's like we always say, we're all works in progress constantly, right? So
All of us, till we die.
yeah. And so as a therapist, then your role when you're kind of working with clients is not just to tell people to leave, it's to actually to support them to be better resourced, is it? To support them to have the
Yeah.
tools to make decisions, because I suppose as a therapist, that's not your role, is it? To give the
No.
advice.
No, 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 no. I don't, a lot of women come to me in trauma bonds, and sometimes they might not even tell me that they're in a trauma bond until they get to trust me. And then if they are in one, I always say, I write this and I say this, the decision is always the person's. And I always think about my own self, who I sat in therapy for 7 years with my therapist while married to the wolf, and went to therapy every week. And she had to sit with me and be quite patient, right? So my job is to facilitate their process, whatever that is for them.
Sure. Maybe
Now,
she should
unless
write
they're
a
in
book.
unless they're in severe danger, of course,
Yeah.
then that's different. Then I have to, take steps to keep them safe. But otherwise, I'm there to support them. And as I mentioned, to connect them back to their authenticity.
Yeah, sure. And do you think, so most people that come to you as clients, they know about do they know about your history, about your story, or they just know that you're a specialist in this area?
I think now most people do know. When I initially started my practice, people did not know, and then they would find out and they'd be like, whoa. But yeah, I think today now people know my history, and I think they think, well, if you went through that and came out like this, you're really walking your talk, and I'd like to work with you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So our theme at the moment, the book that we work on a different book every 2 months. And our theme at the moment is basically emotional well-being, but looking at financial well-being as part of that, because the book is called Money, a Love Story by Kate Northrup. And a lot of it, we're kind of, as we're working through as a group, where a lot of it we're finding is about self-worth and value, and kind of how that's kind of caught up in what we think, what we value. So whether that's money or things or relationships or whatever it is. So what's your take on emotional well-being, and then also how financial well-being plays into that?
Yeah, so I mean, emotional well-being, is a tricky thing to measure, and it's kind of hard because we all don't start out with the same set of parents. And if we didn't win the parent lottery, right, it can feel hard to catch up. And if you didn't win the parent lottery, you have to cut yourself a lot of slack and compassion, but you can catch up because our family of origin sets us up for our emotional well-being. And now the good news is, if they didn't do that, then through therapy and other resources such as this, you can feel good about yourself, right? And I don't really love the word self-love. I like the word self-acceptance, really accepting who we are, the good, the bad, the imperfect, and not judging ourselves, and being our own cheerleaders. We're also hard on ourselves, and our inner critics beat us up. And one time I did an exercise where I gave everybody, I said, here's a bag, put the word that you used to criticize yourself in the bag, and you'd be surprised. Everybody's inner critic is kind of the same. So really being kind with yourself and showing up for yourself and committing to yourself, right, with the things that you want to do. So not self-abandoning, right? That's like, if you need to go to the gym, showing up, right? If you need to eat healthy, showing up for yourself. Because when you show up for yourself, you show yourself that you value you, you're committed to you. And it's not easy to do, but it's a practice. And in regards to, financial well-being, everybody, they always say, what do couples come to therapy for? Two topics: sex and money. So our relationship to money can be quite tricky. I can tell you firsthand that money does not make you happy, right? After having all of this abundance of wealth and feeling quite miserable, honestly, it almost became a trap. But I think money is like anything. We have to respect it, earn it, and develop anything external outside of us: substances, food, money. Really be intentional on what we want our relationship with it to be. Like, what do you want your relationship with money to be like? How important do you want it to be in your life? And how much do you think it actually does denote your value? I'm very lucky. Yeah, I'm very lucky in the sense that I get to do a job that doesn't feel like work, but I still get paid. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very personal decision, a personal thought process of what you want your relationship with money to be like. And that's what we do in therapy, is that I never put my own bias on my patients. A good therapist, it's really more a deep exploration of what it means for them.
Yeah. Something that's coming up a lot for us is it's kind of, how do you want to feel? Money is really kind of a tool, isn't it, to make you, do you want to feel secure? Do you want to feel abundant? Do you want to feel connected, social? So it's a tool, isn't it, to do all those things?
It can be, it's, again, it's a resource, right? And we do need resources to live well. So for sure, it's something to take seriously. Unfortunately, though, we do live in a world, I think, where it's a little bit too valued, especially here in the States, but again, it's a very personal decision that I think intentionally we all have to decide what we want our relationship with it to be.
Yeah, that's a great word, intention, isn't it? With it in all aspects of life. I also love the phrase you used. Well, I found that the phrase you use interesting: self-abandoning.
Self-abandonment, yes.
Yeah, and you talk about that quite a bit in the book. Can you explain what that is a little bit more?
Yeah. So we self-abandon when we go against our values, or we go against our needs or wants or authentic feelings and desires. And a lot of times we do this to get external validation, to get people to like us, to try to fit in. And that's why betrayal and when love goes bad, it can feel so painful, because if you abandon yourself in love and then your lover abandons you, you have twice the abandonment, right? So I say the opposite of abandonment is really a commitment to you, and a commitment to your authenticity and to your values, and to keep connecting back to that as you go through your day and make decisions like, you know what, like I was like, I'm hungry. Do I pick peanuts or potato chips? I'm like, I'm going to pick peanuts. It has protein, right? So we think that those little decisions don't matter, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
And self-abandonment can even come down to a simple choice such as that.
So a lot about choices. What do you think
Yes.
what are the effects or the ramifications of abandoning yourself? Like, is it kind of just, is that something that might lead to
I think to deep amounts of shame, and feeling broken and not feeling good enough, but yet we're kind of the ones perpetuating that, because we feel shame, we feel broken or unfixable or unworthy. And so self-abandonment, I think, can really lead to feelings of shame and depression.
And is it something that mostly happens in relationship?
Well, yes. I mean, but it can happen with yourself when you say, I'm going to wake up at 7. I'm not going to drink that extra glass of wine because I want to wake up and go to the gym. But we're like, screw it. You have too much and then you don't wake up, and then, you don't feel good about yourself. So if you can pause and be mindful and say, I made this commitment to myself that is important to me. So it can be just also within yourself.
Yeah, sure. And so do you feel you were in that situation when you were in the marriage?
Yes. Yes, I had to constantly self-abandon. Yes, my needs did not matter. My values did not matter. My boundaries did not matter. It was no choice. I had to choose the couple's identity over my identity.
And was that just because that was the only way to be with that partner?
Yes, that was the only way to be with him. It was his way or the highway.
Yeah, sure. I've heard you say actually about your I was going to say current husband, but you've been married for over 20 years, haven't you?
Yeah.
Your current husband, that when early on when you had your first disagreement and you voiced your opinion, and he said, yeah, I hear that, and you couldn't believe it because you were like,
I couldn't believe it.
No one's ever you've never had like a disagreement as someone's actually said, yes, I heard you, I see you.
Yes, because, like I'll give you a prime example, which I've mentioned on a few times in other interviews, where, when I first met my ex-husband, I didn't want to have children till I was older because my parents had gotten divorced. And I didn't really, in my mind, I had a thing of 30. I don't know if it was a good decision, bad decision, but that was my value at that moment, right? Or need at that moment. And he was like, nope, if you're not going to, first it was like, if you're not going to marry me, I'm not going to date you. And I didn't want to get married, right? So I just self-abandoned. I'd be like, okay, I'll get married, and then if I'm not going to marry if you don't have kids, okay, I'll have children. So I kept self-abandoning my values, my needs, my wants to keep the connection. Now, back then, I didn't know what I was doing. He was just plowing through my boundaries, and I was just like, oh, he just loves me so much, right? But, love shouldn't never make you have to give up yourself.
Absolutely. And you do talk as well about that kind of like the intensity of like I think we call it love bombing now. And you say back then that wasn't really talked about, but quite often I do hear that phrase now. But that kind of intensity of like early days, things that are a bit like, that's a bit much.
Yeah. And that's like more like a threatening, dominating tactic then that's the intensity that somebody like a pathological lover, that's what I call them, will use. And then the love bombing is more of like the constant texting, the constant need for connection, the buying you things, future faking, showering you with extreme warmth initially, right? So it's coming at you so fast.
Sure. What's future faking? I haven't heard that.
Oh, future faking is when they're like, I want to live with you forever and we're going to buy a house or we're going to go on this trip but then things don't necessarily materialize.
I have heard that. So I did hopefully
Yes.
know what you're talking
Yeah,
about. Yeah.
it's just a different way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And you just mentioned the term there, pathological lover. So is this something that you've coined, or is this a term that's recognized?
The reason why I chose that instead of narcissism, because narcissism is just thrown all over the internet and it doesn't really define this person that well. And pathological means mentally unwell. And so the way I think about it is that someone who will use, betray, harm, and exploit someone that they supposedly love to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status, to me, is mentally unwell.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I coined the term pathological lover.
Sure. So it's a bit, it's kind of, is it one step beyond a narcissist? It's kind of,
I think
just,
so.
yeah.
Yes, I think so. I do believe that.
And do you think, is this something that is it like learned behavior? Is it something that people use? Like you said,
Yes.
it's people who aren't well emotionally, mentally. Is it something that that's probably, if you meet somebody like that, they've always been like that?
Yeah, I think it is learned behavior from the home. I think also this person feels very entitled to do what they want. Sometimes they feel very superior, and most times they don't have a moral compass.
Mm-hmm.
So like anything, there's multiple causality as to, why they are who they are.
Sure. And so can we talk about trauma bonds then, and
Sure.
what they are, and then maybe I know that you've written a whole book about it, but kind of like recognizing them, and then kind of like how a good way to start dealing with them, I suppose.
Yeah, so again, when I was in my first marriage, nobody was talking about trauma bonds or narcissism. I mean, we would call it domestic violence, right? Back then. And for a trauma bond to exist, there has to be two conditions. Well, first of all, it's a toxic, dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally connected or attached people. And it has to have two conditions. It has to have a power imbalance, meaning one person has the power. And that can be because they have more resources. That can be because they have more decision-making capacity. That can be because you love them, just the very fact that you love them. Somebody can have power over you that they can exploit. Or if they're dominating, threatening, you can fear them.
Yeah.
Right? So they can have power over you. So there has to be a power imbalance. And then there also has to be something called intermittent abuse or intermittent reinforcement, which means that, like in the beginning, there's extreme love bombing and generous and warmth and care and helpfulness. But then the mask falls, and then the partner can be very cruel and controlling and unkind. And so it's those two extreme experiences of your partner that create extreme experiences in you that actually create the bond, ironically.
And is that because you see the lovely side, and you feel like
Yeah.
that's, so are you attached to that side, or you're attached to all of it?
You're attached to all of it. The kind, generous, helpful side gives you hope. And so you keep hoping that they will change. And just the extreme behaviors, actually, it's the extremity of the goodness and the badness that create the bonds inside of the person. And in my book, I talk about how there's research that animal trainers that use intermittent reinforcement with their animals, the animals were shown to attach to that trainer 230% more than when the trainer just treated them with straight kindness. So when I read that statistic, I was happy, not for the animals, but just that it explains why does she stay, right? Because there's always stigma thrown towards the victim.
Mm-hmm.
And trauma bonding is a very complex psychological process.
Yeah. And you're talking about when the mask falls, and is that usually, is there a time scale to that, or that could be like in your experience, I suppose a lot of that was tied up in drug addiction, wasn't it, for George?
Yeah, with mine, it fell pretty quick after 6 months. I just was not, didn't know what to look for. But it can happen early, it can happen years in, every trauma bond is unique in that way, but it does fall. And you start to see words not matching actions.
Sure.
And you start to get really confused.
And what about people who are possibly in this situation but don't really see it? Like I was speaking to somebody about this conversation we were going to have and talking about trauma bonds at the weekend. She might even be on call tonight, actually. And she did say to me, the thing is, when I was deep in it, I didn't know. It's only kind of with hindsight, looking back, I can see.
Yeah.
And even though friends were like, that's very controlling. And it's like, is it? Like almost like a blindness to it. Do you experience that a lot in your clients and friends?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, there's a reason why we have the saying, love is blind. Right. And then if the trick is that if you're not that type of person, and if you go into a relationship, just share with the motivation to love and connect and to get to know someone, maybe, and even perhaps build your life with them. That's a very different intention than someone who's intentionally looks at people as a means to an end to use control and harm. Right. So, but if they're masking that intention, it's very hard to see it. And that's hence why I wrote my book, to say to everybody, here are the signs. Okay, I have a pathological lover checklist in there. Yeah, like these are the signs: words not matching actions, plowing through your boundaries, you can't have needs, they're very selfish, they can't hear you, they're super intense, right? So I literally lay it out in a checklist for people to check, because when you are in love, and also like, we don't want to think the person that we love is like that.
Yeah, sure. It's like you really want you really don't want things to be true, so you can kind of we all let lots of things slide, don't we?
We let lots of things slide, and then they do come in as Prince Charming once in a while, and we're like, aha, they are good, they are good.
Yeah. And so if somebody was to tick quite a few of those things in your checklist, then what would your advice be? And this is not as a therapist, I suppose, this is just your advice as someone who's been there.
Yeah, I would say run to therapy, okay, and to a trauma-informed therapist, because if you've been in a trauma bond for a long time, you're going to have trauma symptoms, relational trauma symptoms. But the most important thing is, and even if you can't go to a therapist for financial reasons, don't isolate, because trauma bonds, we want to isolate. They isolate us, the partner, the pathological partner. And a lot of times we feel so much shame for staying that we isolate. But I suggest initially you talk about it, share with people, hey, what do you think? Am I seeing this the right way?
Yeah.
And really start to process and talk about it. Secrets, if we keep everything secretive, we can't see and we can't heal.
Sure. So my next question then is how do you support if you feel like they're in that situation?
Yeah, so I have a nice sentence for that. And what I say is always ask your friend, do you want to be helped, heard, or held? Because again, the person usually feels so much shame and is usually so beaten down at that point if they're asking you for help. And they don't have their needs getting met at all in a trauma bond. So you're really offering them, like, what do you need at this moment?
Yeah, sure. I think the book's so great because you share a lot of case studies of people who you've worked with.
Yes.
And when you're talking about the shame and the kind of, and talking about supporting other people, like quite often, like some of the stories that you read in the book, you're just like, how were they still together, or how were they together for so long? Like women ending up in prison even though their partner was the abusive one, and things like this. So it's obviously it's more common than I ever realized that people are in these situations.
People are in these situations, and every single story in my book is real. I couldn't even make all that stuff up if I tried, right? Because my brain couldn't even think of those things. And of course, the names and everything's changed. But I put the clinical examples in there because I want to validate the people's experience, the woman's experience, and say, you're not crazy, you're not alone. This happens to, I work with famous actresses, to women out of work, different socioeconomic statuses, lawyers, judges, teachers, therapists, right? Nobody is immune to falling prey to these people. And it's their shame to carry for being abusive, not yours.
Do you think the abusive person can change, ever does change?
I'm in the business of change, so I do believe that people can change, and I've seen it go both ways. The only thing is that the pathological person has to want to change. And if they're getting all their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status, they don't have that much motivation. Right, unless, of course, their whole world crumbles, which, by the way, for many people it does. For many of them it does. But by then it's often too late.
Yeah.
They've lost it all anyway, so they're like, why change?
Sure. And like going back to what you said earlier about intention, it's like, what is your intention with wanting to change? Means that it's like, if you're happy with it, quite often it probably sounds like they're pretty happy with the situation, suits them.
It suits them, even though their life is a complete mess and they have a wife and a mistress and they're still looking at girls on Facebook, or or work it, like they're gambling. A lot, it's a little different than addiction in that abusers don't really hit rock bottoms. A lot of times they just go on to the next.
Sure. Okay. So the book title is recognizing, which we talked about, and then escaping and healing from trauma bonds.
Yes.
So escaping, you kind of talked about run to a therapist and kind of get yourself in a position where you're able to make decisions, I suppose, and you're understanding what's going on. But then do you have any kind of practical advice
I always say, once the aha moment really goes on in your head, right, the light bulb goes on, don't ever tell them you're leaving. I write about this. Don't ever let them see you coming, because if you're living with at the bottom of a trauma bond is coercive control. So you're living with a controlling person. You're going to go in and say, hey, I'm leaving. They're going to freak out, right? So you have to like mentally make that notation in your mind, but then behind the scenes, do everything you need to do to leave, whether it's documenting if you're married, preparing your documents, if, seeing a lawyer if you need to, or if you're living with somebody, like really figuring out where are you going to live, how do you get first and second month's rent, really having a strategy and a plan, and then going and never telling them when they're on drugs, like I did, which did not go well for me. Tell them in public, right? There are certain ways to do it, but you have to be really prepared, because if they've been abusive and controlling when they're supposedly in love with you, how do you think they're going to be when you leave? They're not going to be that friendly, right? Yeah, sure. So you have to be prepared for post-separation abuse. And I write all about that. And I know, sometimes what I write about is hard. And so that's why, and even as I'm talking about it, to make sure you're aware of your breath and keep breathing and ground. And I give exercises in the book to soothe yourself and to ground yourself, because it's a very, very challenging process, but a lot of people leave.
Yeah, and like you say, change is possible.
Yes.
In your experience and in your story, I think you were married. The marriage lasted for 8 years, around 8 years. What time elapsed from you kind of realizing I need to get out of this until actually doing it? And how did you make the escape?
Yeah, I think probably the night before my wedding. I realized, but I had a lot of people at my wedding, and I was young and not very confident, not very mature, and I went through with it. But then slowly but surely, there were so many signs, and his drug addiction, of course, just got worse and worse and worse. And there were there were 3 defining moments. One was when I told him he had to get sober, and he got very violent with me and kicked me down the stairs. And so after that, our relationship was never really the same. And the hard thing about this sort of person, or at least my experience in my relationship specifically, I'm going to talk about, When I confronted my ex and said, you know, that was really hard, your drug addiction, your emotional abuse, that time you got physical, he looked at me and he's like, it wasn't that bad. And that callousness and that, now I didn't know I didn't even know the word callous back then. That callousness, like, but inside, something inside of me closed, and that callousness and that lack of empathy, there could be no reconciliation. There could be no resolution. I was done. That was almost to me as bad as what had happened. But then once he got arrested for 11 counts of money laundering and he got an ankle bracelet on, I was like, I'm safe. I can leave. He has no more power. So once his power was taken away, I knew it was my ticket to ride.
Yeah.
That was, I talk about a last straw moment. So there were 2 or 3 last straw moments for me. And then, but that ankle bracelet ironically, the ankle bracelet on him was my freedom.
Totally. And I heard you say you took the kids and the curtains and just got out of there, basically.
Yeah, I didn't want any money. I didn't want anything. You know, when you've been coercively controlled and pressured and emotionally and verbally abused, freedom feels like $1 billion.
Yeah, sure. Like that. Just aware of the time, guys. If you have any questions, let me know in the chat, because I have so many. So I'll just keep going. But it's like we've got about 10 minutes or so left, so please let us know in the chat if you've got any questions or you want to share anything. So recognizing, escaping from, and then healing, which is what I'd love to hear about. Kind of, obviously your journey has been, you now help other people in toxic situations, which is amazing and must be very healing for you. But it's been, like you say, it's been hard work, hasn't it? So what would you say were the most important stages in your healing journey from this?
You know, I think that when you're in a trauma bond, you have to become so obsessed with the other person, because they really do demand that. The first step is to turn the mirror back on yourself. Who are you? Right? Because one of the symptoms is you lose yourself. And so who are you? Get curious about yourself. Take attachment assessments. I have tons of free assessments on my website, so please utilize them. And get to know yourself. Get to know yourself. Who are you? What do you want? What do you need? What do you value? I would definitely get into work with a trauma-informed therapist, because you will have complex post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And sometimes you'll have depressive symptoms, intrusive symptoms, physical symptoms from this. And so really go and work on yourself. And you are never responsible for the abuse. Abuse is always the fault of the abuser, but you are responsible for healing, right? And how do you rebuild yourself? How do you rebuild your confidence? And that's a very personal, everybody needs their own personal guide work with that, with their own therapist or their coach or whoever they want to heal. And you have to have self-care, because after trauma, self-care stabilizes you to be healthy and strong enough to actually go through the healing process.
That's a great word, stabilizes, because that's what you haven't had for so long, right?
Exactly. So you
just attached to someone else's wants and
needs. Crazy and chaos, right? So you have to stabilize with self-care, and then figure out which symptoms you have, and then go work on those symptoms, because everybody's going to have different symptoms.
Sure. What are your self-care go-tos now, and have they changed throughout the last 20 years or so?
Yeah, you know, they've always been the same. Good sleep, good food, within reason. I mean, I'm not like, I'm still reasonable. I don't like, only eat a certain way, but within reason, 75% of the time eating healthy, making sure you exercise 3 to 4 days a week, right? Connection with people, journaling, I found really, really helped me. I have like hundreds of journals all over the place.
You're in the right place.
Yeah, I have like so many journals, but it hasn't really changed that much. The only thing that I've added now, because people say it's so good for you, is I do a sauna. I try to do a sauna 4 days a week, and why that's really good, and a lot of reason why people love hot yoga, is because the skin thinks of the heat as touch. So it can be it can be very healing. But whatever that is for you, Tai Chi, music, poetry, I have a whole self-care checklist in my book, right? Knitting, you know, watching dumb TV. It just whatever soothes your nervous system and makes you feel like solid and safe.
Sure. So you're kind of you are a somatic specialist.
Yes,
That's what you trained in. And so
yes,
somatic, that is that all about, that's using, that's trauma being stored in the body, is it? And
yes, yes, yes.
understanding that and moving through it through
And
movement.
really walking, getting into your body because you ruminate and you're thought obsessed and so many thoughts are about what's he doing or, you know, do I go back, right? But coming back to the body because I believe that's where the authentic self lives, is in the body. Our ego, our thoughts, defenses really live in the brain, but come back home to the body. You'd be surprised what you find there.
Yeah, amazing. I'm learning a lot more about that at the moment, so it's really interesting to talk to
Yeah,
you about it.
yeah,
I have got a question from the chat box, please.
sure.
Talking about the children and relationships and how you managed that post breakup. So how did you
Yeah.
make sure you protect yourself and the kids?
You know, I think I was very lucky in the sense that my ex-husband got arrested, and I'm going to tell you why, because it humbled him.
Mm,
So a lot of my patients, I always say, don't have that luxury. They're still dealing with a very egotistical, controlling individual who has not been humbled. I was very lucky. He was humbled. We've always been able to have a good relationship around our children. That doesn't mean that we haven't had screaming matches about it, because we have, but in general, we've always come back to what's best for the children. But I know that that is not always the case for a lot of people. And really, it takes a lot of work and a lot of education. And I work with a colleague, Dr. Christine Cocciola, and she's on Instagram if anybody wants to look her up, who really just works with the mothers dealing with their children with these men. Not that I don't deal
wow.
with it, but that's all she works with. Because it really can be very, very challenging. But again, I think I was quite lucky because he had some humility.
Yeah, and I suppose it's very extreme as well, like you say, getting arrested, being under house arrest. You were
Yeah,
able to remove yourself from the situation and the kids.
exactly, exactly. And he was so grateful to have the kids, and he has a great relationship with the kids. And, you know, my advice to anybody is, when you're dealing with a pathological person and you're trying to make decisions, again, come from your authenticity. Don't rebel against them. Don't please them. Keep checking back in with yourself, and you'll make the right decision. And they might fight you. They're going to do tons of crazy things, but you just keep grounded in that. And my husband said a great thing to me when I first met him. He said, cream rises to the top. And if you're authentic to yourself and all you do is want to protect your kids, that will prevail. I know it doesn't always feel like that, but it will.
Yeah, again, back to intention. I think it's just so important.
That's right.
So Nadine, do you think Jordan is still a pathological person then? Pathological lover?
I mean, listen, I haven't been with him in 25 years. He's remarried to a young 35-year-old, very lovely woman. So I'm happy for him in that instance. But I think he is who he is. I mean, he's a very agentic, grandiose person who gets things done. And I think now that he's doing well again, I'm hoping there's been some change, but I don't deal with him, but I'm assuming he's probably the same.
Yeah. And you said your kids are grown up now, the kids you have
Yeah.
together. And is it your daughter who's a therapist?
My daughter's a therapist, and
That's
I'm a
incredible.
GP. I'm a grandma. She has a 9-month-old baby. Yeah, so you know, the nice thing about our story is that we're okay,
Yeah.
right? And you can be okay after trauma. Trauma does not have to be a life sentence. You can. There are enough resources in the world, like this beautiful book group that you have, that go out there and grab them. Like Mr. Rogers says, look for the helpers. You guys are probably too young for Mr. Rogers, but he says, look for the helpers. They're everywhere.
Yeah. And don't let it define you, right? It's like that's one chapter of
No,
your life. And you're proof, I
no.
think you are an optimistic person, you are a hopeful person. That comes
Yeah,
across.
my name actually means hope. Nadine means hope. I didn't know that. But also, we have to remember that the brain and body really only grow from threat and suffering, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I wish there was a different way, but that can really, just force exponential growth in us.
Yeah. So it's like leaning into that sometimes, isn't it? And also recognizing, looking back and recognizing how far you've come, like you say, that kind of
Yeah,
like the acceptance, but also self-compassion and celebrating the
self-compassion.
fact you've moved through something.
Yeah, self-compassion is a big part about it, and I write about that. And that's, and when I say that, I don't mean to have like toxic positivity, like everything happens for a reason. It's just that I know I've lived through it, and I've helped so many women and men get to the other side. Like, human beings are very resilient.
Yeah. Yeah, how amazing that you get to share that journey with them as well. And
Yeah.
just out of interest, do you still go to therapy yourself?
I just stopped.
Uh-huh.
I just stopped. Yeah, I haven't gone this year. But I've gone my whole entire life basically since I'm 23, because I went to therapy because I met Jordan, because my life was unmanageable. So I haven't gone this year, but I'm sure I'll find some other really crazy healing modality to do.
Yeah, there's a new one on the list coming up.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll find something. I've done EMDR, I've done all the somatic things, and I've done meditation. I'm running out.
Yeah.
I
So
think my grandson is
oh,
my therapy now.
definitely that would be very therapeutic. And
Yeah.
for anyone who is interested in learning more about somatic healing and
Yeah.
somatic, like where would you start with that? Is it to go to a somatic therapist, or just to
Yeah,
start
the
from the
theory,
modalities?
yeah, the theory that I studied, which
Mm.
actually is very big in Europe, after my doctorate, is called, it's such an obnoxious name, but it's called the Neuroaffective Relational Model, or NARM, NARM. And if you go to their website, they have practitioners all over the world. There's also sensory motor psychotherapy, which is another really good one. But those two are really excellent. And somatic psychotherapy is actually bigger in Europe than it is in the States. So it's coming more and more to the States. But we know trauma lives in the body, so we can't just talk. We have to connect to our
Yeah.
body as well.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I feel that a lot. Thank you so much. Helen's just
Yes.
shared in the chat a beautiful message of hope. I'm very grateful that you shared your story. So, and I am too.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, it's I get it. I've been there. I know, when you're in the thick of everything, I just remember feeling lonely and insecure and like, how the hell am I ever going to get out of this? And resource yourself with therapy and food and friends and this group, and just keep resourcing yourself, and then you build resilience. It's possible. And you can
Yeah,
see me
that's so
on
good.
social media. I answer all my own direct messages.
You share so
So
much good stuff on social, and I think David
yeah,
shared a link to your website. And guys, there's so much
yeah.
the great resources on there as well. So
And I have so many free resources on there, a lifetime of resources that I've, compiled. And just thank you for sharing this hour with me. I really
oh,
appreciate it.
thank you so much. Thank you guys for being here and supporting us. And yeah,
I'm
thanks,
so
Dr.
glad we
Naine.
did it, even though yesterday
Did
we
it.
we couldn't do it. But see, and not just, what I have to say, I just loved your attitude, because we both got confused with the time. And it was like no blame, no shame. It was just like, okay, let's try it again.
And here we are. We did it.
And here we are. I'll beat him perfectly. Here we are.
Perfectly. Thank you so much, Dr. Naine. It's
All
been
right,
awesome to hang out with
guys.
you for an hour. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of
Okay,
your
have a
week, and
great
we'll see you
night.
soon. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Take care.